1245. Restate my assumptions. 1. Mathematics is the language of nature. 2. Everything around us can be represented and understood through numbers. 3. If you graph the numbers of any system, patterns emerge. Therefore, there are patterns everywhere in nature.
One of the things that philosophers do when they think about mathematics is they ask a very fundamental question. What is a number? What is a number? Do you know that hardly any professional mathematicians have ever asked the question, what is the number 1? Seriously. So I said, now, students, I want you to tell me what the number 1 is, okay? Is this the number 1 right here? Some would say yes. Is this the number 1? Is this the number 1? And what I'm trying to get from these students is this answer. None of them, none of these things you've written on the board is the number 1. What you've written are symbols. Reference for, R-E-F-E-R-E-N-T-S. Reference for the number 1. And so then I went on and I said, do you know, students, that actually in any book that you might read, you'll never find the real number 1? So suppose I give you some propositions that tell you what the real number 1 is. Why don't we begin by saying the number 1 is a concept. Ooh, that impresses students. What is a concept? It's an idea. The number 1 is not found in this world. The number 1 is an idea. Okay. Now, where do ideas exist? Ideas can only exist in minds. If you're ever at a bus stop and somebody else at the bus stop is going around like this, and you say, what are you doing? And he says, I'm trying to capture ideas. Walk away. Don't get on the bus with that guy. Ideas don't exist out here. They only exist in minds. Okay? Okay, kids. Now, another point. The number 1 is eternal. Now, I'm going to offer you an argument for this, kids, but I would say to my freshman students, but even if the argument doesn't persuade you, just humor me, all right? I mean, one thing you need to know about philosophers is we're weird people. If we weren't weird, we wouldn't be philosophers. Now, the number 1 has always existed. I mean, if it didn't always exist, when did it start existing? When did the number 1 first exist? Now, some people might say, the day some primitive man first thought about it. Well, how did he know it was number 1? Did he say, I just had an idea, and I want to know if it's, and no one else has thought about it? How's he going to compare his idea, the number 1, to anybody else? It's sort of like, well, the perfect circle has always existed. The Pythagorean theorem has always existed. No, Pythagoras thought it up. No, he didn't. He discovered it. There has always been a number 1. And if it didn't always exist, when did it begin existing and what brought it into existence? Number 4, the number 1 is immutable. What does that mean? It means the number 1 has never changed and the number 1 can never change. For one thing, if the number 1 could ever change, what would it change into? The number 2? Then it would no longer be the number 1. The number 1 must be forever unchanging, because if it ever did change, it would no longer be the number 1. Now, one other thing. The number 1 must exist independently of human minds. Why? Because no single human mind is eternal or immutable, nor is the collectivity of human minds eternal and immutable, because there was a time when no human minds existed. So if the number 1 is eternal, the number 1 must precede, it must antedate human mind. So, number 6, there must exist an eternal and immutable mind. If the number one can only exist in a mind, and the number one is eternal, then the mind in which the number one has always existed must be an eternal mind. And if the number one is immutable, and it must exist in a mind, then the mind itself must be, that mind must be immutable